Hi there. How are you, Maria?
Hello.
So we are recording this session. It would be great if you could add your name, where you're calling in from, in the chat box, and anything else you want to let others know about you. Like it might be 45 degrees or 105 degrees where you are, something like that. Just feel free to let yourself be known in the chat box. That would be great. And throughout this webinar, I do encourage conversation in the chat box, so feel free to keep it going over there. So, and you can have your videos on, videos off. When your videos are on, they're only in a little thumbnail, but feel free to keep them on. So welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is called Let's Talk About Toxic Bosses, and this is part of a series of webinars that we offer called Rewiring Workplaces. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lori Shook, and I am from Shook Svensson. We're the ones who are running the Rewiring Workplaces webinar. And Shook Svensson is a small consultancy that focuses on workplace culture and helping organizations become a great place to work, you know, to retain talent and to have people be enthusiastic and motivated in their workplace so they get things done and can enjoy themselves at the same time. We use neuroscience as a foundation for all of our work, which is why we use terms like rewiring and firing and rewiring, and so rewiring workplaces, that's where that comes from. Our series of workshops our series of webinars, Rewiring Workplaces, is our intention is to bring together some experts, people in the know, and talk about a different topic each month. So today is toxic bosses, and in the past we've worked with belonging, creating a sense of belonging in an organization, giving feedback, team coaching, and a number of topics like that. So we think that toxic bosses, or even toxic environments, is a really important conversation. And so we've brought together today 4 people who are experts in this, in the sense that they are people who have experienced being in an organization where the boss was toxic. Now, some toxic environments, it isn't because of the boss, it might be because of a few employees in the organization, but today we are focusing on toxic bosses. So we've got these 4 people. I'll be introducing them in just a moment, and before we do that, I just want to have a little bit of context while I've got my slides up, and then we'll be turning them off in a moment. Just some data on toxic workplaces. Now, I looked at 3 different publications. You can find lots. You Google toxic bosses or toxic environment, you can find lots of data on this. Lots of business results are being reduced, and losses, you can put numbers on those. And here's just 3. 70% of Brits have worked in a toxic environment. That was a report done by HR News. It's a huge number of people. 70%, more than 2/3 of people in the UK have said they worked in a toxic environment. In the US, MIT Sloan Management did a big study last year, and they reported on it in January of this year about the Great Resignation. I imagine everyone's heard about that. So many people, droves of people leaving their jobs in the US. And I do believe that is perhaps a global phenomenon. It's certainly wider than the US, but this report comes from the US. And there were, people were asked, why did they leave their jobs? And 10 times more people said it was because the environment was toxic. 10 times more said that than they said the pay wasn't good enough. And we often think that people leave their jobs because they're not getting enough pay, but really 10 times more than that say, I wasn't treated well. And they leave, and it's causing big problems. Training Industry, another publication, reported, this has been a couple of years ago, they did some figuring of what it costs when you lose people, when productivity goes down because of toxic bosses, or bad bosses is the way they were referring to it. And it was looking like $75,000 per employee per year lost because of the impact of these bosses. So the impact is real. It's not just people, being flaky or snowflakes and saying, it's real. And this toxicity is real. And we're going to hear from some people today about their own experiences. So just a little agenda for today. You'll hear about the real impact of toxic bosses. Our hope is that you become more aware of the toxic behaviors that bosses are exhibiting so that you can spot it. These webinars are designed, our intention is to reach out to learning and development people, HR folks, leaders, as well as external folks, coaches and consultants who work in organizations. So all of you can become more aware of what do toxic behaviors look like, because sometimes it might be a little surprising. We'll look at what is the business impact. Now, we don't have exact numbers from our panel today, but they're going to be talking about their observation of what was the impact on their organization. And then we will look at, what's going on with these toxic people, these toxic bosses. What might be driving their behaviors? Because once we can get a hold of that, we might be able to do something about it. So we will look at what can organizations do. All right, I'm going to stop sharing that screen and ask for my panel to turn their cameras on. So you should see them spotlighted. And you might need to, on your screen, so you can see the 5 of us, you might need to go to speaker view on your Zoom screen. Top right, there's a little button that says view, and if you're in gallery mode, you'll see everybody, but if you go to speaker, you'll see the people who are spotlighted. So I just want to do a quick introduction of, first, actually, I want to say thank you so much for being here. All of you, all 4 of you. I am so appreciative that you're willing to speak to all of us, not just to me, but to be observed by an audience about something that can be quite vulnerable and even scary. I want to let the audience know that I put a note out on LinkedIn saying, hey, is there anybody out there who suffered from a toxic boss who would like to talk about it? I got a huge response. But when I asked a lot of people if they'd like to come on this webinar, they said, no, I can't, no way, I can't talk about it. It's too vulnerable. I might be in trouble in some way. That there might be repercussions coming back at them for having done this. So just know that there's sensitivity, and that's true for the people who are here today too. So we're trying to keep it as anonymous as possible. Our purpose is not to shame or blame or identify anybody as a toxic boss, but to talk to these 4 people and hear about their experiences. Okay, so introductions. Lillian, let's start with you. So just do a little bit of an introduction for everybody, and then audience, you'll be hearing from each of them a little bit more. So Lillian has spent decades working for advertising and marketing agencies, and for years served as a director in a couple of those different agencies. She is currently a full-time coach and has been for the last 3 years. Lillian is largely based in the Netherlands, but as a digital nomad, she also spends quite a bit of time in Spain, including today, and she enjoys the lifestyle there. And maybe spending more time there now that you are getting yourselves a little more established.
It seems that might be the case. Thank you for having me, Laurie. I was not nervous before we started. I'm getting a bit nervous now. But let's see.
Okay. I hope it wasn't anything I said.
No, absolutely not.
Great. Second up is Dan. And actually, Dan, I've known Dan quite a long time, and it was a conversation with him that sparked this whole idea. So thank you for that, Dan. Dan was in the military as a senior enlisted sailor in the submarine service. He then retired and worked as a civilian for the military at R&D labs and military contractors, which is the place I originally met him in. He is currently semi-retired, working on small projects here and there. Dan lives on the East Coast of the US and is a passionate sailor. I hear about races he's going on and such. Say hello, Dan.
Very, very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Birgit is a learning and development professional in a large international corporation. She's originally from Germany and currently lives in the state of Georgia in the US with her husband, her 5-year-old daughter, and 3-year-old son. 5-year-old daughter who's starting school soon. Just heard about that. And Birgit is passionate about running. She enjoys running and spends most of her early mornings on the road training for marathons. I'm so impressed.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Laurie. Super excited about the conversation and also a little bit nervous, but we'll see.
Thanks. Thanks. We'll all just breathe a little, and yeah, I notice my palms are sweating a bit as well. All right, and Ronan. Ronan is currently a team coach working for an international organization. He has spent decades in different countries, working both for the private sector and public organizations as a translator, then as a communications officer. Ronan is French and currently lives in Brussels, and as a hobby, he is a tenor in a musical ensemble of four, singing Corsican, Sardinian, and Italian polyphony. I meant to ask you how to pronounce that word. That's a new word for me. What is that, polyphony?
I guess so, yeah.
Okay, say hello.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Laurie. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great, thanks. So let's jump in. Each of these four will be spending a minute or two talking about the place and time in the past, not at their current organization, but in the past when they experienced a toxic boss. And what I invite all of you who are observing, what I invite you to do is, first of all, see if you notice any similarities to something you've seen before. Notice your own feelings as people describe it, because it's likely to create something in you as well. I know when I hear the stories, I notice my own feelings, like I want to do something about it, or I think, oh, that's unfair, and all those kind of things. Just notice that. And also recognize the fear that's driving these kind of behaviors, because we'll be talking about them a little more in detail. Right, so I think, Lilan, you're going to kick us off?
I think so, yes. So when we were talking about this topic, I realized that I didn't just have one toxic boss, I had a few, actually quite many. And there is a similarity there. There's something that they all seem to have in common, the ones that I reported into. They all had this kind of behavior where they would praise you, you know, you're wonderful, amazing, fantastic, to the max. And then the next time cynically confront me with, for instance, a lack of knowledge about a situation or the world or the company, or no, it doesn't work that way with lawyers. No, it's only like that in your country. Other countries never are like that. So my bosses tended to never indicate that my work was bad. It was just that I was bad. So my being wasn't right. I faced some sexist approaches, which of course many of us have over the years, weren't great. But also sometimes my bosses were trying to convince me that I forgot things, like meaning marching orders or information that I was supposed to know, but they never shared with me. To me, this whole situation was very belittling. I checked with Laurie, that seems to be a real word. And in the end, I was never doubtful about my capacity or capabilities, but I did start to behave like a little kind of whining child who wanted to get my parents, in this case, my boss's praise. So, you know, I was constantly trying to demonstrate that I was doing the right thing, which made me quite, you know, very vulnerable and insecure. In two of the companies, the same was true for my peers, same level, resulting largely in a culture of fear and waiting, which means that there was no initiative anymore and nobody took real responsibility. Everybody was looking up, going like, okay, we'll just wait, you know, because if we take the initiative, it's never good anyway. So I kind of became a shadow of myself, constantly trying to change the boss and his behavior. And at times I believed it worked. And then out of the blue came, I would call the next beating. And I've also realized that to me, this whole situation feels like coming out of a relationship where you are literally harassed. I didn't realize that until I really started to think about the topic. I think that sort of sums it up, what I wanted to bring for today.
Great, thanks, Lilan. Lilan, we'll be digging into all of these a little bit more through topics. So thanks for that. I think it gives us a flavor. And those of you who are observing, feel free to, again, use the chat box if you're noticing anything you want to highlight or questions. We'll try to get to questions if we can, and even share your own experiences. It would be great. Great. Who's next up? Ronan, I think that's you next.
Exactly. So thanks, Laurie. My situation was actually, I had done a job for a long time. I decided to move on, applied for a new job because I wanted to work with someone specific, a very, very inspiring manager. And I got the job, started working with her, 6 months of perfect honeymoon. I absolutely adored my job and the environment. unfortunately, that person left after 6 months, and that's when the toxic boss actually got into the game. Didn't take long. I mean, the person was already around. I could already feel there was something personal against me. I didn't understand why. I asked around what's happening, what have I done? So I was already starting to question myself. Then the person was appointed. I think the day after that, or 2 days afterwards, I was kicked out of all strategic meetings, all strategic discussions. I was not granted any access to the documents I actually needed to do my job properly. And the worst part of it was actually that the person started ruining my reputation across the house. That I realized only after a while, unfortunately. Impact on me, well, quite easy. Very quickly, I was questioning my decision. Why didn't I stay where I was? I was quite happy in the previous job, but just wanted a change. Was not a bad decision. I was new in the job, so probably am I competent to it? But most of all, and although I dare to call myself a resilient person, I was actually starting to crumble. Went to work every morning crying in my office without telling anyone. My wife and daughters would never hear and didn't realize. But every morning I had to actually dig into my resources to find the energy to carry out my job throughout the day. Yeah, that's the setting.
Thanks, Jonan. Thank you. Thanks for all of your honesty, openness, and vulnerability. A lot to share. Birgit, can we hear from you?
Yes, absolutely. So I was also, other than Milan, I did have one toxic boss in my past, which, not grateful for, but I'm grateful it was only one. And I worked for this boss about a year. So she came into, leading our team. I was in this team before. It took me about a year. So I worked for her about 12 months before I realized that I cannot change the situation within that team for myself and for that team. And I decided to make a change for myself and left that department. And very early on, when she came in, it was very apparent that there was a general ignorance towards my person. So in team meetings or in any meetings where more than just myself, so either my team or other stakeholders were in, I was generally ignored. So even when we went around the room asking for ideas or brainstorming, I was either cut off when I tried to speak, or I was literally jumped over in the list of people. So I had very, very little ground to contribute to anything that was going on in the team or with the stakeholders. And at the same time, in my one-on-ones, it was made very clear that I was the least competent person on the team. The term weakest link was used very often from her to me, and that I'm not contributing to the team at large, which would be an amazing high-performing team if I wasn't in there. So I really needed to step up my game. So this tactic was used not only towards myself, but also other team members, which at that point we didn't know or not widely known. And it was just this constant pressure, right? That in my one-on-ones, I perceived you need to step it up, but then really not having the opportunity in larger groups and like actively being hindered to contribute to the team or to the organization. It took a while for me to understand that this was not coming out of the team, that there was not mistrust, from the team towards myself, but it was really her leadership style that I did not jive with, or that put me under this pressure. And it took a while for the team to realize it, before we opened up. So it was a lot of fear going on in there as well. It really had, at that moment, very wide effects, not only on my professional life, but also in my personal life. It took me so much energy, just like Ronan said, to even get through my day, to my professional day, that I had very little left to any other roles that I had. I was a mother of an infant and toddler at the time, so I had barely any energy to be the best version of myself for other people in my life, including my children, friends, definitely my husband. And it's still, you know, a lot of PTSD, I would say, some imposter syndrome, that whenever something changes in my professional life, or I have another, not even boss, but other people, you know, that I work together, I'm like, I have immediately this, oh, I wonder what they're going to say about me, or I wonder if they're going to find me out if I'm really not that competent. So it really moves on, you know, now years afterwards. Just
So
basically
some real seeds were planted, seeds of doubt, and yeah. Well, thank you, Birgit.
Sure.
Thank you. Just I'm really appreciating as everybody shares just the what it might take to one go through that, but also then to reveal it. So thank you. Dan, will you please share?
Certainly. As I've heard before, I've had a number of toxic bosses. As retired military, you might understand that there was generally toxic bosses within the military, or could be perceived as such. But once I retired, I'd gotten a pretty thick skin on what it takes to deal with a toxic boss, and I was not empowered to do anything about it. One toxic boss stands out more than others. And when I realized that I did have some power in that area, I finally decided to take action. But this one was such where they were throwing things. They would throw temper tantrums. 1 second they were very nice, pat you on the back, say you did a really good job. The next, they're screaming at you, telling you you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about. The hardwired response for any kind of request is no. You had to convince them otherwise. Things along those lines. So having to deal with people like that and trying to move the product forward, trying to do good by the ultimate customer was extremely difficult.
Great. Thank you, Dan. We'll hear more about some of those behaviors as we break up into the different behaviors. So thank you for that. That's one of those environments, isn't it, where people probably should expect toxic bosses or something, I think, is the military. And it's still not needed because not all of them are like that, are they?
So some are actual leaders. They listen, and you can get things done. Some are power hungry, that they want to control every single thing. They're micromanagers, and if you don't do it exactly their way, then they scream at you and belittle you, and that thing can transfer directly over to civilian life as well, because I've seen both kinds in my post-military action.
Great, thank you, Dan. So the five of us got together about 3 weeks ago, I think it was, and we started talking, getting to know one another and sharing stories, and we found some themes. And so what we're going to do next is talk about all of these stories in terms of themes. So the themes are going to be about diminished self-esteem, toxic behaviors like blame, contempt, and stonewalling, defensive like that, the screaming and yelling and swearing. We'll be talking about how some of these bosses create in-groups and out-groups and use them as a way to manipulate people. And then there's a theme of ruining reputation. Those are not the only impacts, but those were the sort of strong themes that came out. So this is kind of an open conversation. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. But let's get started on this conversation. We're kind of making it up a little as we go along. But we decided to start first with diminished self-esteem. Birgit and Nilan, you both happened to say something about that. So tell us about that, and we'll all just add in and move through these different topics and see how we go for the next 10, 15 minutes.
Sure. I mean, in my intro, I already said, that this was mainly the huge strategy that was also placed in the team, right? And it, I would say it just was more fruitful for some of us than others, definitely for myself. And I think it was a well planted, whether it was conscious or unconscious, environment that was created, right, to really lower self-esteem and make yourself feel like you're not contributing to the team because you simply lack the competence. And then paired with also you you didn't dare to reach out to somebody. So for me, we went through an interview process with that individual, and along with it, it was an interview panel. So in my feedback conversation, I was already told that none of the interview panels were convinced about myself. I haven't talked to them at all. It was just, conveyed by my boss to me. And, previously I already, like a lot of us, just have a little imposter syndrome. And, when you got good feedback, sometimes like, oh, I'm not sure if they really know me that well, when they say I'm that, I'm doing a great job. So hearing her saying, none of us are convinced about you. I was the only one saying, yes, you can stay on the team. And I think there's something there, but now you have to prove yourself. It was almost, I felt, oh my God, finally, somebody has found me out. I am actually not that competent. And I am actually not that good at my job. And she finally sees through me, right? And it was just planted sort of as an environment at the same time. I was like, okay, everybody else around her thought that. So who should I turn to, right? She tells me that I'm not contributing to the team. I'm the weakest link there. So really it was thinking I can't perform and I don't perform, paired with, and I also can't tell anybody because everybody thinks that I can't perform and I don't perform. So it was very isolating in the team as well, along with, I can't do anything. So I really started to believe it. Eventually it was not a one moment in time for sure.
Milan, how did your experience compare to that?
Yeah, I think
Not that we're comparing, but
Yeah, I don't think they compare very well because it was a different situation. I was never called out as being incompetent, and definitely it was. And that makes me think, Birgit, your story. Everything that's happened with me was always behind closed doors, or in a one-to-one conversation. So it was a complete opposite approach. It was like, screaming at me, and then if I would show up and say to my peers, "Oh my God, you know what happened to me the other day?" and they would be like, "Oh, but he says you're great," which is when you really start to think, "Am I going mad? Is there something wrong with me? Don't I really understand what's going on?" So I never really believed the cynical criticism truly, but I did shrink. I did become kind of my own little girl again, going like, Papa, really, you never told me, I didn't know this. And I started to behave like that, which is awful because that's not the way, at least I never want to be that way. So I guess that's what happened in terms of self-esteem. I think that's what it got to me, where it got to me.
I think that's a good addition, sort of the self-doubt that when you tell other people or even tell outside people, it's very hard to believe, right? Because it doesn't fit to the picture that they may see from that person or that boss. I did have the same way where, the words outside were always great. She was a great leader in words outside, right? Even when the pandemic hit, I had by far the smallest children. It was very hard for all of us in March 2020. I think was just a bad month or start of a bad period. But her saying, the person that needs to be supported on this team is Birgit. We really need to rally all around her. And then at the same time in one-on-one say, Birgit, you need to step it up. See how the team supports you and you're not doing your part. So there was very little ground to say, but you just said support me. So I think that comes to this behind closed doors.
But maybe that's also why it's so hurtful, because it is behind closed doors. And if it was out in the open, you can call out on your colleagues or on other people that are in the conversation. I haven't thought about this earlier. I just realized that now.
Yeah.
Dan, Ronan, you have anything to add to that, or do you see a connection to one of our other topics?
I see a different strategy applied by the toxic boss I'm referring to, because it never happened behind closed doors. It never happened in front of anyone else. It was always behind my back. Never was in my face. She would just ignore me. I never ever speak to me directly, maybe in the first meeting. After that, it was, always delegated to her colleague, but the bad mouthing was always behind my back. So
I had a very similar thing where it started out behind my back, and when I started getting inklings of things along those lines, it became very obvious, and they became empowered at that point to go ahead and belittle me in public. And unfortunately, I was the middle manager of 38 very highly trained professionals, and it started impacting their ability to do work and their ability to work for me, which basically hamstrung me at that point. So it just kind of evolved. But I know what you talk about, Ronan. It starts out behind your back, but when they feel empowered and it gets around, they'll just start doing it to your face, because there's nothing to stop them.
I waited 2 years for that to happen, for that person to say something in front of me in public. That never happened because I was ready and she knew it, that I would have left the room, I would have said something, and I would have reacted very vehemently. I'd never had the opportunity. And I think that's something we need to notice. These people are extremely clever, and they will adapt to their victim. I call myself a victim. I had the discussions with our internal organizational psychologist at the time. She said, I should have filed for harassment or against harassment. It was a solid harassment case, and I didn't do anything. I tried to protect myself, but now I'm listening to the stories, I realize they're so good at interpreting and adapting their behavior to the victim.
It's
I
also
look at that as somewhat of a cowardice, in that they're too afraid to talk to you to your face until they become empowered, and they feel like they've got nothing to lose, so they may as well start at that point.
Oh, I see that differently then. I think it's a strategy. I think it's like somebody just said in the chat, if things are behind closed doors or even behind your back, it can always be denied.
Right. I still look at that as cowardice. They're risk averse. They're not going to try to bring it to your attention to modify behavior, because they don't want to modify your behavior. They're enjoying the power of being able to belittle you.
But it sounds like it's about power and manipulation, either way, whether it's to the face or not. So is that part of the ruining reputation? That's a way of ruining reputation, by talking about you behind the back. Was there anything else about ways they go about ruining reputation?
Oh, it's about talking about you, about me, in my case, to everyone. It was always, not always, but I was lucky enough to have people come to me and say, I was in a meeting and your name was mentioned. You did this or you did that, which was not exactly true, or to say the least. I realized that person was talking about me in other settings, but also I learned a few years later from my new manager that her own N+2 had heard about me, that my reputation had been tarnished at that level too. I don't understand why.
Wow.
I still don't know. The only reason I can talk today and feel pretty comfortable is that I realized that at some stage she got bored with focusing on me and found other victims. And I really did a big job on understanding that it wasn't personal. It wasn't me. And now I feel completely okay with it. I can live with it. I can sleep very, very well at night. But it was a hard time through it. Yeah.
Dan, there was a part of the story that you told me, or told all of us, about as you were leaving, because you left, and this boss of yours talked to everyone else, threatened everyone. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the things that really hurt the most is, as I said, I had 38 highly trained professionals, and they were all friends of mine. We got along very well. I've known them for a number of years. After I left, the real hurtful thing was that none of them contacted me, not one. They initially, when I decided to leave the organization, that was the only way I could affect to the toxic boss, was leave the organization, find something else. Almost all of them wanted to put their retires and follow me wherever I went. And that's a very heady compliment, but I needed them to do what they were doing. A few weeks later, I got word back from one of them that was at risk of even for contacting me, that they were told that none of them were to contact me because I am the evil. And if the toxic boss found out that they contacted me, even in friendship, they would get fired. And that was very hurtful, only because there was some really good people, and I still very much admire those really good people in what they'd done, what they were doing. And it just simply vanished. And the personal toll on me, that was probably the hardest.
Wow, belonging is so important to human beings, and you just had that complete cut off. Ouch! What
It
power?
was.
Oh, what power? Thank you for that. What else? How about if we talk about in groups and out groups? The creating.
It relates to what Dan just said. I mean, there was, if you were to, well, it was extreme in that case because there was the risk of being fired if they spoke with him. But in my case, it was, I could see my colleagues fighting to stay in the in group, you know, trying to please the person, not to fall in the out groups where I belonged, and I think it took them just as much energy as it took me. They were afraid of saying the wrong word, of doing the wrong thing, of being seen with the wrong person, speaking with maybe just speaking with me on the corridor or anything. I realized how tiring that was for them.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think that was a theme that sort of came in our discussions, right, with this in and out group. And it's kind of hard to say whether this was a strategy or a tactic or a known one, but it definitely was, at least in my case, the biggest contributor to sort of how this toxic behavior maintained this environment that was in there. It was, in my case, it was also very clearly in and out group, right? There was an in group that was almost invincible in their ideas and whatever they said. This is how they advanced, or they advanced in this team. And there was always this very great relationship with this boss and this in group. Partially also to just say, I have a great relationship with my team. Like, my team loves me, because some people truly, wouldn't say loved her, but came along, great with her. And it also switched. Like, it was not a clear cut, these people are the out group and these people are the in group. You could switch. I myself never switched, but there were people that all of a sudden were great, that were cut off beforehand, that was said, don't share best practices with her, she knows nothing, share best practices with this person. And knowing how dark the out group is, once you're in the in group, there was still a lot of empathy towards other people and checking in behind closed doors. Also, it's like, hey, this team meeting seemed very tough for you. How are you doing? If you're in the in group. But the out group is so scary and so dark that people really tried not to be in the out group anymore. Or, saying to the out group, see what the in group is doing, see what this person is doing. She's doing such a great job. Don't occupy her time, right? Don't reach out to her and learn from her, because she really is busy high performing and sort of balancing out what you don't perform. So it was this in and out group that was also made to not talk to one another or not exchange. We did anyway, eventually. But it is a tough situation, to your point, Onan, I completely agree. It is a tough situation for both the in group and the out group. Like, there are just no winners in this situation.
And imagine the decisions that people are making. You're making a business decision, doing some kind of work, so they can stay in the in group, rather than making a decision for what's good for the project or the business. I can imagine there's some not great decisions made just because of that. Well, I have to stay in the good graces of this person, so I'll do this thing, without being able to think about what might be the right thing to do.
100%.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I look at a lot of that as adolescent behavior that we learned in junior high school or high school, where who sits with who at lunch kind of a thing. Who's the in group? Who's the out group?
Yes.
And the reality is none of them are good and none of them are bad. They're just who can belittle who the most, who can be the biggest bully on the block. Because the in group a lot of times becomes the bully, or as a group become a bully. They won't individually do it, but as a group, they can belittle somebody. And it's demeaning behavior that should have been left in high school or junior high school, but it has evolved into the workplace.
Yeah, our emotional brain really is a teenage brain. And unless we have the adult brain to really calm it down, that's what comes out is all this teenage childish behavior.
You mentioned something the other day, Laurie, about research done in English boarding schools.
Yes, there is a real phenomenon called boarding school syndrome, which a lot of people refer to as boarding school trauma. Colleagues of mine have said, I was in this boardroom, like a top level people with in a large organization, and it was like being with a set of 5-year-olds. And there's this trauma that's coming out. And there's abandonment when children are left at a boarding school, fend for yourself, parents are gone, such a young age. And that stuff gets, it's traumatizing. And it's the trauma that brings out this teenage brain later.
Yeah. I think it takes a while to understand. It took me a while to understand that I was not dealing with an adult's behavior. That's why there was some dismay at the beginning. What's going on? I didn't understand, and it took me a while to realize. And if you go to that I was actually dealing with a child rebelling against something. I think we want to mention that later, but dealing with their own stuff in the job place. Instead of that was not the right place to do that. But we were the victims of a childhood trauma, I guess. It took me time to realize, okay, you're an adult, but this is not adult behavior. That's why it's hurting.
Yeah. And it's surprising, and it's hard, like you said, it takes a while. I'm expecting adult behavior, and
my thought on that was that I wanted a boss that essentially enabled me to accomplish better things, not to belittle me, to turn around and inhibit my productivity by yelling at me, by screaming at me, by taking things that are in my head that are not in their head. Because on the subject matter, I knew a lot more than they did. And they didn't like that. So of course, their only response was to try to belittle me, to say that they're the greatest person in the world and whatnot. And of course, they're not. And that there's something seriously wrong with that kind of behavior.
And I think then that's like when you have these examples, that it makes me realize so much. And you said it before, like this power that really you have, right? Because it's in your head, or in my case, in my head, or whoever we work in these teams, this huge power that we have is so threatening that, they work so actively to take this power and make you feel powerless to a point where you really believe, I don't have any power. Like when people ask me afterwards, whether formally or informally, did it never occur to you to do X, Y, Z? I'm like, it truly didn't. I didn't feel that power. Even if it occurred to me, I would have never had the courage to go that route, right? Because the power was completely stripped away. And it takes so long for you to understand, I actually do have power. I actually have way more power than you do.
Absolutely right.
It takes so long.
It just takes a while for you to recognize that. And it does take a tremendous amount of courage to do something about it.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, Dan, it can be risky to do something about it. Yeah.
Right.
When these toxic bosses might have a lot of power connections, and something that's they create repercussions if you go after them. Well, where I'd like to move the conversation now, just given time, just a couple of minutes, sort of bottom line about the business impact. So from the organizations that you were in, because of this toxic boss or similar toxic bosses perhaps in the organization, what could you say about the loss of revenue or loss of results or any of those things? What's a statement you can make from your viewpoint about the cost of these toxic bosses?
Well, from my perspective, the costs, because I was working as a military contractor for operational forces, the cost could come in terms of lives, operational missions, things along those lines. But let's just put a cost of the millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. And the reason is because they so empowered themselves by depowering the teams that the teams were actually afraid to accomplish the tasks involved. So they go out and try to do something, and they were afraid that they may fail. And in the process of being afraid that they may fail, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. They either failed or didn't do it to the best of their abilities. And somehow I had to turn that around. I was a middle manager there, so I had to turn that around and empower them back again. And there was a personal cost in doing that, and I won't go into that now. But the productivity loss because of the cliques, because of being afraid of being yelled at, because of a number of different reasons. They didn't want to make the boss mad. The fact was, I was the boss, not the other person. I was their boss, and you're never going to make me mad. But that was the productivity loss that I saw. So hundreds of millions of dollars and potentially hundreds of lives.
That's clearly a significant impact. Thanks for that, Dan. Others, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, of course, my situation is completely different. I'm miles away from Dan's type of environment. But in my environment, it was, everybody started to behave the same way. Everybody started to behave like they were less competent or less good or less sorry, I can't.
Effective?
Yeah, well, less confident, I think, mainly. So instead of doing the thing that you know is right, we started to all sit there and wait. So the good people left, or the ones that could leave left, and it becomes kind of a mediocre organization. And I only realized now that I'm speaking out loud. So yes, it reduces the overall competence in the organization, but it also makes for the toxic boss the spotlight and the stage where he can always shine. So the more you make your people less shiny, if you want, or less in the foreground, the better you look. So it is a very, I find, very weak way of demonstrating how great you are. And that's the way it feels to me. So the end result is the organization isn't half as good as it could have been.
That's the point.
Ronan, you have anything on costs?
I mean, definitely there were some, hard dollars involved, because in that team, I think within the first 18 or 20 months after this team was formed, almost all of us have left. So it's just, recruiting costs alone, not only now in the, so-called Great Resignation, even before, recruiting costs are high costs, right? Losing somebody, signing on bonuses, it takes time, the productivity that's lost in between, the knowledge transfer that doesn't happen. Behind every little thing of recruiting new people, you can put a dollar amount behind it that would go up. Not sure if it's into the millions, but definitely in, a good 6-digit amount for this team. And it just went on from there until it was detected and something was done about it. So it was a lot of money lost in that organization, apart from productivity and the things that are a little bit harder to measure.
Thanks, Birgit. Ronan, how about you?
No, it's about the same thing. What struck me is at the time that we developed strategies to bypass the person. It costs us a lot of energy, to wrap things in a way that they would be they would be confirmed, accepted. But it took us 3 times, 4 times more time just to try and sell it in a way that we thought would be acceptable. Oh, no. But when I'm saying that, I'm thinking of being French, of Louis XIV on his throne, saying yes or no. Just, it's a yes or no. I don't care if it's good, if it's bad. I don't understand the business anyway in that case. Not talking about Louis, but about that person. I don't understand the business. I feel like saying yes, or I feel like saying no. It was totally arbitrary. So we had to develop strategies. It cost us a lot of time, energy. Projects would drag on and on and on. And it carried on until that person retired. And
Wow.
we knew that person would retire, so we just postponed some projects. 2 years. 2 years.
Wow. So thank you, all of you. It's great to get a variety of the costs. So some lives, millions, opportunity costs, and thank you for sharing that. Let's look at, but why are these bosses toxic? We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm bringing slides back. Panel, please still chip in if you have some things to share. I'm just going to run through kind of quickly. So why are, and do you see that? Why are they toxic? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yes. It's not showing my normal green outline of that for some reason. So why is this going on? What is happening with those human beings that makes them toxic? And if we could just have a little compassion, which is hard to do when we think they're horrible, but let's have a little compassion for a moment. What might be going on over there? And when we look at that, we can find, well, they might be overly stressed. They might be in burnout. Maybe they've been working too hard for too long and they no longer have access to the part of their brain because it's fried, the part of their brain that controls their emotions. There might be untreated trauma, like the boarding school syndrome. It's untreated trauma and it just comes out. And Birgit, you mentioned untreated trauma, like your PTSD, that's a small version of this, bigger trauma, but it's still trauma that comes out and it drives us. And so some of these toxic bosses might have, who knows what kind of trauma they're dealing with. So that's untreated trauma. Sometimes it's lack of leadership skills. Maybe they've never had any training. They were just put into a position for whatever reason they were put in that position. Maybe it was, some kind of entitlement, or who knows. People end up in positions and don't have the training. Sometimes they are just modeling after bad role models. So they haven't had any good role models of empowered or empowering bosses, themselves. And arrogance, entitlement, also no feedback. So maybe they don't even know their impact. Maybe they don't care, but also maybe they don't know. Maybe they just don't know any better. And they think this is what leadership means. I've met many leaders who've said, no, you have to whip people to get them to do anything. If you don't, they're not going to do anything. I've met people like that who didn't seem insane, but they really thought that was the way to lead because they'd never seen anything different. That was their working experience as well. Mm-hmm. And so they're not getting the feedback and they're not shown other options. And then there's the sociopathic brain. Jutta, I saw that you wrote earlier, there's a sociopathic, psychopathic, we're not going to get into the differences. But there are, there's the sociopathic or psychopathic brain that does not have the capacity for emotional empathy. What we normally call empathy. There's a difference between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. So it's just being clear. You can look up the difference if you want to know. So that's those are some of the whys. Candle, any others that you want to add, or anything you want to add at this point?
Cocktail. I think in my specific case, it was a cocktail of several. Clearly.
Cocktail of several. Yeah.
Yeah. Clearly.
Yeah.
I think the reason, and why you said, Laurie, it seems counterintuitive, but the reason why I like that, you mentioned this, or why we go through it, because this is the part for me after I went through this experience, but that makes you feel a little bit more empowered to think about, okay, what was going on for them, and also seeing what was my part in this environment, right? I was still a player in it, even though I may not have initiated some of those things. So definitely there, in my case, there was a lack of feedback. I did not give feedback. I never, clearly stated, this is the impact you're having on me. So just without blaming anything, without, judging any of these player situations, it is healthy to go through that why are they toxic exercise for sure.
And we need to do that if we're going to do something about it. So that brings us to this identifying toxic bosses. So some of these bullets here on this page came from you all on the panel. Listening. So in an organization, if you're in an organization and you want to, know that you have a feeling something's going on, what can you do? Identify what's going on with the toxic boss. Listen to people who complain. Sometimes complainers are written off as victim mindset people, but sometimes they've got something to really say. And it takes courage to say it. So really listen and create places where people can talk about it. You had mentioned that, and I don't know why I didn't put it on that slide, but create places where people to talk about it. I know why, it's because it's on the next slide. Notice employees, this is identifying toxic bosses. Notice an employee's sudden drop in performance, people being on sick leave a lot, something had markedly changed. Was there a difference? Did some boss change at that point? Look for signs of the in-groups and the out-groups. Those are not really healthy. So what's going on there, and investigate it. And look at the data, dig deeper when it's alarming, such as a high increase in team turnover. Investigate these things. What might be at the core of it? And it might be a toxic boss or an toxic employee. It doesn't even have to be the boss. And then suggestions from the panel of what you can do about it. Provide a space, collect and give feedback to the boss, either internally or get someone externally to do that. Create an improvement plan, make it real and have real consequences. So really talk to this person like, you are not going to get away with this any longer. This is causing us lots of money. Provide a coach or a therapist. Provide leadership skill training. And understand, please understand. I've heard this excuse so many times. Oh, well, this person is a really top talent. They're such a great individual contributor. We really need this. No. It is costing the business, the organization, time, money, and people. Yeah, it is not worth it. Just want to say a couple of words about what we do at Schuck Svensson along these lines. Here's some training programs we have. Rewired to Relate. It helps people understand their stress levels and the impact of how they behave when they're stressed. So it helps people manage that stress. Rewired to Communicate is some leadership communication skills, and then Rewired to Lead, which encompasses those previous two programs. Rewired to Lead really helps people tap into themselves, understand their brain and what drives them, perhaps getting in touch with some of that trauma and how that shows up, helps them communicate, give feedback. It's a broad spectrum leadership program. And then we've got executive coaching and 360 feedback. So if you do have a toxic boss, you've pinpointed, you might be able to get them some feedback using this exceptional feedback tool, the Leadership Circle profile. We offer that, as well as the coaching to help people improve. And then we've got a team coaching approach, Rewire Your Team. We use all these rewired words again because we use a neuroscience approach. And this is all to help the whole organization work together to have a great place to work. So I am, and if you are interested in any of our programs, please do get in touch. I think Frodo's putting our information in the chat box. We'd love to have a conversation with you if any of those sound of interest, or you're even just wanting to have a conversation to explore. Do we have a toxic boss running things here? In our last minute, I want to turn it back to the panel. Any final words from you about your experience of being here today? Suggestions you have for people dealing with toxic bosses out there? Anything you'd like to say?
As I mentioned to Lori when we first started talking about this, just in discussing it is rather cathartic. I'm at the end of my career, so I can talk about it with impunity. The others probably cannot, but it's rather freeing to the mind to say that I was not alone in this. And I thank you for the invitation to speak to that.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for being a part of this. And
yeah, maybe the same is true. Speaking about it helps. I realized only when we started speaking about it 3 weeks ago. I mean, I realized so many more things than I had realized before. We started doing that in this group of 5. So I think I would like to throw that out there for everyone experiencing a toxic boss. Talk about it. There's some really great coaches out there, guys. So one of them being Laurie.
And you.
Yeah, thanks, Laurie, for bringing us together. It really helped talking about it. And I've talked about it before, and even with, us five, I'm like, there were a couple of things in our pre-conversations, like, who talked about it? Very triggered, have not dealt with it.
Yeah.
should do something about it. So just continue to talk about it. So thank you, Laurie, for bringing us together.
Yeah, thank you very much. One thing I noted, because I was fortunate enough to have two toxic bosses. I learned from the first one. I'm thankful to that person because I grew a lot. I'm really much stronger today. And I realized, and I will liaise to what it was Richard saying, I ran away. The second time I knew, I ran away immediately. I started looking for a new job like a week after that person arrived, because I knew, I identified the behaviors much faster, and I ran away.
That's to protect yourself. Yeah. Great. Thank you, panel, for being here. There's lots of gratitude for you in the chat box as well. Thank you, audience participants, for coming and observing. We're going to close this call. Panel, if you have a few minutes, we're going to close the call, but can you come back for a couple of minutes just so we can close out just ourselves? But as we close it, it turns off all the recordings and things. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Have a good summer.
Bye.
Bye.